While everyone returns from Europe from their summer vacations, the hot new thing in sports investing is to go to Europe to buy a team there. And so today, on this episode of Business Decision with Mike Vorknoff, I'm Mike Vorknoff, by the way, I want to talk to Matt Rizzetta about his new investment in a Italian basketball team, Napoli, along with his larger suite of investments all across that continent and including North America too. And Matt, thank you for joining me. Thank you for coming on the show and being willing to have this conversation.
Mike, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on the program and congrats on the new venture.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And before I go into the TLDR on your whole career and how you got here, I want to ask you one big question off the top. You bought the Napoli Basketball Club earlier this year. The season, we're recording this on Monday morning, October 6th. The season starts roughly this afternoon, evening, depending on your time zone, against Virtus Bologna. Why do you buy an Italian basketball team? Why did you buy Napoli?
Well, that's a loaded question, but I can tell you that the outcome is we're super excited to have bought it, and I'm all in. And I really believe that the next boom in private equity sports investment is going to be in European basketball. I did not know that about 18 months ago when we started this process, but now I can tell you wholeheartedly we're all in, and we're very excited about it, and convinced that this is the future.
Well, I do want to get into all that, but I honestly I didn't know it was a loaded question. What is the loaded part about it? What's so complex about the Napoli investment?
Well, I wasn't looking for a European basketball team at the time. We had built this portfolio of assets, primarily soccer assets in Europe and North America, and I had carved this, niche and this reputation for being sort of an owner operator that was able to identify these underdog type assets that might have been undervalued for one reason or another, and then kind of bring the assets to life, get them promoted, improve their commercial strategy in North America, and really increase the value of the assets. And that was really what I had been focused on doing. And by the way, have a hell of a good time doing it along the way because it's a lot of fun. You got to remember when you're working in sports. I don't need to tell you this, Mike, but when you're working in sports, it really is a privilege. And
Hmm.
so I had this. I just had been doing this for the past 5 or 6 years. Had a great time doing it. And then I was approached about a year and a half ago by a group of oil executives who wanted to buy a European basketball team. And they came to me and they said, Matt, can you help us? And I had no experience at the time in the European basketball game, but obviously when you own soccer clubs over there, you sort of have the key to all of the relationships you need. And I was happy to help them, just being very passionate about European sports, the Italian culture in particular. And I made a few calls to owners that I knew that had basketball teams, and I was able to give them 3 or 4 leads. And along the way, I found Napoli, and Napoli was actually the deal that I recommended this group do. For one reason or another, they decided not to do it. They decided to buy another team, which I had sourced for them in the north of Italy. But I fell in love with it. I thought Napoli as a brand is an incredible brand. Really represents, the Italian American diaspora, which is a massive community, almost 20 million Italian Americans. Most of them identify with Southern Italy, not with Northern Italy. And obviously, Napoli is kind of the unofficial capital of all of Southern Italy. Everything that the De Laurentiis family has done over the past 20 years with the soccer team, Napoli now went from really a provincial club to one of the most valuable and important global soccer brands in the world. So we were able to sort of play off that. Napoli as a tourist destination has just completely exploded. It went from being perceived as kind of this gritty, blue collar, working class city, which it still is. That's still really the roots and the fabric of the city. But on the backdrop of just incredible amounts of resources that have poured into it from a tourism standpoint, the Amalfi Coast is in the backdrop of it. So I kind of looked at all of this, and then I was looking at the NBA's plans. NBA obviously has announced without any sort of shyness or uh, or ambiguity that they're planning to expand into Europe. So I think owning a premier basketball team in a tier one European city, there's a lot of business sense that makes, and that was really the thesis with Napoli. It took about 12 or 18 months, obviously, to put the deal together, work the numbers out, and bring the operating strategy to life. But as you mentioned, tonight is the culmination of all that as we get the season kicked off against Virtus Bologna, who are the defending champions of Italy, and the participants in the EuroLeague, which is the premier competition out in Europe. So we're excited about it. It's really just the beginning. It's step one in the project, but just getting here is something I'm really excited to have done. And I'm doing it with amazing partners. I was able to put a group of great partners and friends of mine together, a lot of whom are connected to me through my alma mater, Iona University. Dan Doyle, Ben Benny, Bob Wood, Angela Pasto. These are just great guys, and we're all in on the project right now.
Yeah, I mean, one of your well, I guess the former coach at Iona, Rick Pitino, I think he bought a team in France at one point. He may still be in that. I think he was in that with Stu Jackson. Obviously, Trieste was bought by a group led by Connor Barwin. Luis Scola, the former NBA player, bought another team too, Varese in Italy, and I'm sure there are countless others. Marshall Glickman is trying to run the British Basketball League. So we've seen a lot of Americans go over to Europe to get into basketball, right? And Europe isn't known for basketball necessarily. It's a soccer continent. You own a soccer club, Campoboso, right, which is in the third division in Italy. What is what is so alluring about European basketball now that people want to go over there? It seems spend significant amount of capital, right? You mentioned even the NBA is trying to get there. Is there a way to eventually make money on the sport in Europe? Having talked to, I've done some reporting on the NBA Euro plans. We can get into that. Maybe you can explain it to me because far better than I know. But even the EuroLeague owners, some of them say it's hard to make money in that sport. What makes you want to go over there?
Well, I think so. A couple of things that you brought up that are super interesting. Number one, I think when you look at these assets, Mike, you have to look 5, 10, 20 years into the future, and you have to ask yourself, what is the world going to look like then? And in this case, you're asking yourself, what is the sports world, and particularly, what is the basketball world going to look like? A decade from now, 2 decades from now, and clearly, the European game is the future. If you look at the NBA now, I think it might be close to 40% of NBA players are all born outside of the United States. If I recall, I think out of the past 10 NBA MVPs, I believe only one of them was American born, which is pretty crazy when you think about it. Now with the NIL and the NCAA, it's created a player trading economy for basketball that didn't exist before, which is something we were very used to and accustomed to when it came to the revenue generating sources for soccer teams. So much of it is generated through player trading. You develop a player, you buy a player for, X, and then you develop the player and trade him to a bigger team for X, times a multiple. And that never existed in basketball, but all of that is starting to change now with the NIL, because now you have these major schools that have significant resources behind them, and they're turning to Europe to buy talent. So now if you lock up, if we're Napoli or you're Milano or you're Trieste, as you mentioned, or you're Madrid or Barcelona, and you have an interesting player in your youth academy, that player maybe in the past was a player that you really couldn't have, monetized, but now with the NIL, as long as you have that player under contract, you can sell them for proceeds. And the NIL, the NCAA has opened up a new market that didn't exist previously. So I think that was something that was very interesting. Another thing, Mike, when you look at the economics of European basketball, and this is all changing for the better, but the economics of European basketball, we were used to doing soccer deals where, soccer is obviously the primary sport in Europe. And when you look at the multiples on these soccer deals, they trade at very, high multiples, premiums typically between 4 and 10x revenue. And then we looked at basketball, and the basketball multiples for a lot of these transactions at the time were trading at, in some cases, 1x revenue, which was a fraction of what we were used to seeing with soccer. So I said, that's interesting. We could get a basketball team, which is kind of the future as we saw it, of sports investing in Europe for a fraction of the multiple we would pay for a soccer team. And then even in the past 18 months, since we got into European basketball, those multiples, we've already start to see those trends change. I've helped advise on 2 or 3 transactions since then, and the multiples are all in the 2.5, 3x, 4x range. So they're clearly creeping up. And then I think in the case of Napoli, this is something I would advise any prospective European basketball owner, really look until there's a TV deal. TV deals drive so much of the revenue. And a lot of the EuroLeague owners I'm sure you spoke to are lamenting about the fact that there is no significant TV deal yet, which I believe is going to change in the next 3 to 4 years. But until that changes, as an owner, you really have to ask yourself, what can I do to bring incremental revenue streams to my club that didn't exist before? So that's where these international markets, I think, are important. And having a brand like Napoli, it opens us up to North America in a way that a lot of other teams don't. With all due respect to I don't want to use any names or whatever, but with all due respect to secondary or tertiary cities or towns in Europe, they really don't have addressable markets in North America. In the case of Napoli, that's not true. In the case of Napoli, we can really leverage merchandising and content and media and sponsorships and academies, in North America in a way that a lot of other teams don't have the luxury of doing. So that's something we're really going to lean into, which is why I think if you're looking at investing in European basketball, the first place to look at, in my opinion, is these tier one destination cities that open you up to that have some sort of appeal in North America. It's something that my buddy David Kahn did it with Paris basketball. He was kind
Mhm.
of the first one to do it. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're just doing it with a brand that I think is really attractive and is kind of positioned a little bit differently than some of those other cities might be.
Yeah, I mean, look, everyone knows the city of Napoli, right? The soccer club obviously is famous too. I think it had Maradona at one point in the 80s. When I went to Napoli there one time, many years ago, back when I had a life and before kids, I remember people just lining the streets to watch the soccer match that day instead of doing anything else, right? It has brand value here in America. The thing that you mentioned about NIL and creating kind of a transfer ecosystem for that, essentially, similar to what soccer has. And I hadn't thought of that, to be honest with you. I've heard a lot of lamenting from Europe about how schools are coming in and poaching players, and there's not money coming back to the clubs that, they feel they found them, they developed them. They didn't get to have them play for their, the varsity team essentially, or they weren't able to sell them on. Do you see some kind of marketplace happening in the future where it is akin to what happens in soccer, right? Where you have kind of like gradual growth from small club to medium club to, if the player gets good enough, to another one, with kind of like tail end dividends for almost every team in that ladder.
I do. I think you're already starting to see it. Even, you mentioned Rick Pitino earlier at St. John's. I think Rick Pitino publicly stated he has no interest at this point in recruiting freshmen, right?
Yeah,
And
he's
so,
out.
so clearly, the NCAA teams, particularly the tier one, well capitalized NCAA programs, are all turning their focus to older players and to European players. And I think that's creating this economy for academy players or players, European players who grew up in academy systems that didn't exist before. Like even our team, Napoli, we had a kid who now is on another team. His name is Thomas Akunzo. He was rated one of the top, 10 or 20 power forwards in all of Europe. He came up through our academy system. I think he was 16 or 17 years old. I mean, and we lost him. Unfortunately, we lost him before the transaction concluded. But that's a kid that is getting looks at from every major Division One program. 6'9", 6'10", versatile, 3-4 player, can shoot, can rebound, get up and down the floor. He also grew up in a European academy system, which is completely different, as you know, from the USA AAU system. These kids are used to playing really in a professional environment. They're used to practicing every day. They're not in the AAU system. You're playing, in some cases 4 or 5 games in a weekend. There's really no time to hone your skills and learn the fundamentals. So I think all of those trends have really played to the favor of the European academy players. And I think now you're going to start to see those trends turn into, materialize in the form of economies and capital opportunities. And I think, you're already starting to see that in the next 3 to 5 years. I think the European academy system is going to turn into a multi-$100 million, if not billion-dollar player trading economy as a feeder system into the NCAA, into the NIL.
Does the school pay you? Does the agent pay you? How does that work?
So these are all things that I think are still being written, and I think even the European teams are still trying to figure it out. We're dealing right now with 2 or 3 players that we have that are very high valued academy players. They're getting a lot of interest from Division One schools, and we're all trying to figure it out. We know that step one was making sure the player moves from an amateur agreement to a professional contract. So once you have him in your professional system, now he's technically under contract with your team. And for as long as that contract is valid, you as the ownership of the team own the rights to the player. So that was really step one. But a lot of those things are still being figured out. I think even the NCAA, obviously now they have the audit bureau that they formed, and there's the vote, which is becoming more and more prominent. I think all of those things are still being figured out, but I think there's no way around it. European teams that are responsible for nurturing and developing and grooming this talent, now that there's going to be a real economy for it, vis-a-vis North American well-heeled Division I programs, I think are going to stand to benefit in one way or another. It's just a matter of how do you formalize it and make sure it's documented properly to benefit everyone, to benefit the player, to benefit the team, to benefit the schools.
Yeah. No, it'll be definitely fascinating to see how that works out. I think there is a reckoning of some sort coming for the NIL market. I don't know what it looks like because everyone seems to be complaining about it to some degree. And so when that's the
Yeah.
case, it's not going to be the NCAA that doesn't. They haven't done anything to this point, but someone's going to force it upon them. So I'm curious to see if it goes the way that you said. And obviously, I know European teams and leagues are trying to find a way to fix it on their end to make sure they're a part of this process going forward because they feel like they've been kind of excised up to this point. I want to ask you about Underdog. I see obviously it's on your shirt, but it's also the name of your Underdog Global Partners, which is kind of like where you house all of your sports assets. Napoli, obviously, Campobasso, which is in the third division in Italy soccer. You have Donnarumma, which plays in Italy's second women's division. CPL Quebec, which is an expansion team in the Canadian Premier League. Did I miss any teams? Have I not included any?
No, for now that's it. We'll
Okay.
see where we go from here.
It was a long list, and as I was making it, I wanted to make sure. I was like, I can't count this many teams. Um, what's the thinking there of creating kind of this multi-country, multi-sport combination of sports asset? We've seen this done in some cases across sports, but it seems like it's increasing now.
Well, I think, Mike, our thesis is, first off, I've been really blessed, the past 5 or 6 years since I became a sports owner. Sports assets and sports investing walks you into so many incredible relationships, a deal flow that I personally never thought I would ever, be able to, be in the at the center of. And Underdog Global Partners (UGP) is really the culmination of all of that. It's really me sort of centralizing that, professionalizing all of it. So we're starting with those four sports assets you mentioned. We had built this track record of really identifying underdog, low value or not low valued, undervalued assets in highly attractive destinations across the world, and then bringing them to life and building incremental value by things I mentioned earlier, commercializing new revenue streams, developing player trading, economies that didn't exist before, leveraging media. In the case of Campobasso, we built sort of a Wrexham of Italy type project around the same time Ryan Reynolds did it, and we just sold the rights to the story to Disney and to ESPN, which was an awesome experience. So I wanted to really house all of these assets and opportunities in one professional structure, which is Underdog Global Partners. It includes three subsidiaries. It includes our sports franchises, which you mentioned earlier, media and IP. So like our Disney deal, our ESPN deal, Running with the Wolves, lives in our media subsidiary, and we have a lot of other deal flow in the media sector, and then real estate. And real estate is not random real estate deals. It's real estate that really is of service to our sports assets. So right now, we're in the middle of potential transactions to build stadiums and arenas that will support our club and clubs that are sister clubs of ours across the world. Potential academy projects and stuff like that, and all of that. Because we really think that UGP is the future of sports private equity. It really is built on. Obviously, you want to build it on professional and attractive return profiles. But now it's more, sports investing is about more than just IRR and financial returns. It's about more than just that. It's about creating experiences. It's about opening up access. And then in turn, those experiences and access really help our LPs and our investors open their world to new deal flow and learn new things. And, we're really looking at it on a holistic level. And I think this is the future when it comes to sports investing.
I mean, how much of this whole thing is basically you guys getting into a party with all your partners and everyone else that wants to essentially invest in sports, and now you're like, all right, well, we're all at this party together. We might as well work on other things and see if there's deals out there. It seems to me like, you know, on another podcast, I was talking about Mark Walter, right, who now owns the Dodgers, the Lakers. I think he owns the Sparks as well. Um, he might be the most powerful guy in Los Angeles without any of the actual political power because he owns some of the most popular teams, right? Like if there's someone who's wealthier in LA, they damn well are not as popular or infamous as Mark Walter. So how much of just owning a sports team gets you this kind of capital in whatever field you're looking to and this invitation to invest and do other things? And how much of that is the appeal to all this?
Well, I think what you're getting at, Mike, and it's a great point, is the aggregator factor. You put one person in a room and one person has X amount of deal flow, whether it's in sports or sports related assets. Remember, when you talk about sports assets, it's not just sports franchises, it's sports media, sports technology, data and analytics, AI. There's so much to it right now. But then when you start to bring more partners to the table, it has this aggregator effect where now you get into their deal flow. And just as an example, like you look at the assets under management that we brought over to UGP from day one, just look at the Napoli deal itself. Napoli was a deal that I got into because I was helping another group out. And then because I was helping another group out, it led me to that deal, which I think is going to be a game changing deal, potentially, the most upside asset in our whole portfolio. But I would not have been able to access that deal without having had the soccer team first and without having had other partners around me. So that sort of opened me up to other deal flow that I wouldn't have had access to otherwise. So I think it really has to do with this aggregator effect. And then the other thing is that, one deal begets another deal, begets another deal. Just as an example, about a week and a half ago, I can't disclose the name, but I was introduced to a Premier League level opportunity.
Disclose it. Go for it.
If you do the peel the onion, I'm sure you can kind of figure it out. But there's a couple Premier League level teams, and we got walked into those deals because of partners in our network. Partners said, "Look," and that's really what UGP is about. Is we've kind of proved concept that we can source undervalued assets. We can build value by bringing them to life and helping win championships and bring new commercial streams of revenue to the table that didn't exist before. And now UGP is really a mission for me personally to show that I can do this at scale. And if you can do this with single and double digit $1 million deals, why can't you do them with top 20, top 50, top 100 sports franchises in the world? And I believe that's what the future holds for UGP over the next 1 to 2 to 3 years.
Does the winning matter? Like, does it matter if Napoli wins?
1,000%. In fact, Napoli, I come from New York, where I didn't think you could get more pressure and more demanding fans than the New Yorkers. But then I met the Neapolitans, and it's a whole different level. And in fact, I was doing a press conference there when we introduced our coach a few months ago, and the fans were like, because Campobasso is a beautiful, beautiful project, but Campobasso it's a real underdog project. It's a place in Italy that is overlooked. They've never, just being in Serie C to them is like a gift. It's like, don't leave, we're Serie C. Napoli, it's not the case. I was doing a press conference a few months ago to introduce our coach, and the fans were like, Prez, they're like, that's what they call me, Prez. They said,
Yeah.
This is Napoli, this is not Campobasso. And I said, guys, I'm from New York. He said, what do you think? What do you think? I'm used to losing? Like, we're here to win. And there's a lot of pressure. Every move you make is super scrutinized. Obviously, we've benefited from the fact that the Napoli soccer team is doing so well. It's become a global brand. They won the Italian championship. They're a major player now in the Champions League. But that's also created higher expectations for us as an American ownership group on the basketball side, because this is a team, Mike, that hasn't made the playoffs, the basketball team in Napoli, in over 20 years. So, and you're talking about Napoli, one of the most important cities in Europe, one of the most important global brands across the world, sporting brands across the world. They haven't been in the playoffs in basketball in 20 years. So these fans are hungry to win, and they expect that we're going to win. And we embrace the challenge, we embrace the expectations, and we make no bones about it. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a project, and there's steps involved here, but we want to build one of the most successful sporting stories in European basketball. And to answer your question, you absolutely have to win. If you don't win on the pitch or on the court, nothing else that you do will succeed. Your merchandise strategy won't succeed. Your media strategy won't succeed. Nobody will take you seriously. You just won't receive the credibility you need to make everything else work.
I mean, you hired James Laughlin from the Pelicans over as your general manager. How much do you, and I don't want to use it as a catch-all, but, how much do you intend to Americanize Napoli, whether it's the style of basketball? I wrote about not Virtus, I'm sorry, wrote about Varese a few years ago when Luis Scola took over, and he said, we think that Italian basketball hasn't caught up to the NBA in analytics and style of play, and they wanted to NBAify their team because they thought it was a competitive advantage. And so how much of you coming to Italy is bringing some NBA concepts, some American way of thinking about basketball versus keeping what works in Italy and that league specifically?
Well, one thing, I talk to my partner, Dan Doyle, about this all the time. One thing that I've learned in my career, Mike, is, stay in your lane, stay in your lane. And I know what I'm good at. I've become very good at sourcing these deals, bringing the vision to life for these deals, putting operating teams in place. But I really trust our sporting guys to make the sporting decision. So James, the one thing I knew was that is the NBA is the preeminent basketball league and product in the world. And I wanted to make sure that we had NBA thinkers and NBA minds and people at NBA credibility to really build the sporting side of our project with Napoli. So James, mentioned James Laughlin, who's got 2 championship rings, by the way, with the Golden State Warriors, then went on to achieve a lot of success with the Pelicans. Young guy, mid-30s. I really think, James is amazing. James is somebody who I think 5 to 6 years from now, you'll be seeing as a top NBA GM if I can't convince him to stay and see this through with us at Napoli, which I fully intend to do, by the way. So the first thing I said was, look, I know we want to have NBA thinkers around the table with us, but I think I have the humility to recognize that I don't know the first thing about what kind of system we should run and what kind of personnel we should have on the floor. But I know I want to put people in a position who do know the answers to those questions. And that's what James represents. In terms of what Louis said, I think there's a lot of interesting points that he made sort of behind the scenes off the court. Uh, these teams typically, not just in Italy, but in all of Europe, they're not, even though it's starting to change, but they have never really optimized data analytics, the scouting function. We went to the NBA Vegas Summer League, and you don't see even just simple things. You don't see European scouts walking around with polos and T-shirts, representing that you don't know who
Yeah.
they are. And those are things you would never see, obviously, at an NBA combine. So I think those things are all changing. I think that's also the reason why you've seen those deal terms being reflected in the multiples. Historically, European basketball teams have traded for, at 1 to 2x revenue for a reason. And now that's starting to change and creep up. And in the next, 5 to 10 years, I think they're going to start trading at the same value that the soccer franchises are trading at as they catch as the rest of the world catches up. So they're going to look at data analytics, scouting, how do we improve our marketing function, our content function, and all the things you're used to seeing in the NBA. The one thing that I think we can all agree on is that the European game is a much more fundamentally sound game. It's a much more disciplined game. They teach basketball properly. And I think that's why the NBA is also looking at Europe, just like Europe, ironically, is looking at the NBA.
Well, let's go there because I don't want to take up too much more of your time. But the NBA, as you said, not being shy, they want to go to Europe. They want to build this European project, whatever this ultimately looks like, and they want to get it launched by 2028 at the latest. It seems. Adam Silver's been out there shaking hands, kissing babies, kissing rings, like with everyone across Europe. And their plan is to go into the biggest cities in Europe, right? One, what do you think of that? Having some knowledge of the economics of the sport, the popularity of the sport, and does that dovetail at all with Napoli's ultimate goal of where you hope to be in 5, 10 years competitively and which leagues you're playing in, across the continent?
Well, I think it's the right strategy, certainly. I think the NBA still has not been fully clear about what, tactically their strategy is going to be,
Yep.
other than announcing this is their intent and these are their plans. But then you have, some of the most brilliant minds sitting around boardrooms at the NBA. I'm sure those minds are going to figure it out in time. So I think they have developed the thesis, which is we need to be in Europe, even the NFL. Roger Goodell. I mean, look at what the NFL has done in Europe and now in South America. I think the NBA has a very similar plan. But then when it comes to, it always comes down to brass tacks. It always comes down to what are the nuts and bolts of that strategy. And I think, look, I do think there are serious and significant obstacles and challenges to overcome when it comes to European expansion. And that's probably why the NBA has been less less aggressive maybe about what specifically their tactics are going to be, because you look at the sporting culture. Obviously it makes sense on paper to have a team in an NBA franchise or some sort of NBA presence in every major European city, London, Barcelona, Madrid. I would argue Napoli is right in there. We have the North American diaspora, the Italian American community in a way that no other city in Italy, not Rome, not Milan, has. So I think we would certainly want to be in that conversation, and I think we will be. But there's also a sporting culture in Europe that exists that's completely day and night and different than the American sporting culture. And I'll just give you one example. Like, look at you being in New Jersey. I mean, look at the Knicks playoff craze. Every time the Knicks make the playoffs, it it encapsulates and it, captivates all of New York City, right? And courtside tickets at a Knicks game are going for 60, 70, $100,000.
Insane.
You can't get into the Garden for under a couple $1,000s when the Knicks are humming in the playoffs. That type of culture will never, in my opinion, will never translate into Europe. And it has nothing to do with economic means or resources or passion. The fans, if anything, I think in Europe are more passionate. But these teams are still very much rooted in the communities. And you have to remember the history. Napoli was founded as a community club, both the soccer and and our basketball team that were founded for laborers and for workers. And still the ethos and the fabric of these clubs still remains the same thing that they were founded on. And I just think it's going to be difficult. Like if you've seen where look at some of the clubs where Drazen Petrovic came from, where Nikola Jokic came from. Have you seen like the videos in Serbia and Bosnia? I mean,
Yeah.
it's insane. 20,000 people like jumping up and down. You feel like it's a crazy, crazy atmosphere. That's the basketball culture of Europe. And those are the same people, by the way, who are paying 10, 15, 20 euros to get into the game because it's a social experience. It's a community experience. It's not necessarily a commercial or an entertainment experience, which is something I think that, it's a give and take. The European teams, I think, have acknowledged that we need to adopt more NBA style commercialization and entertainment to our experiences, but we can't lose the fabric of what brings the fans to the games in the first place, which is built on very much, hard work, blue collar, community efforts. And I think that's something that the NBA is going to have to figure out. And I think they will. I mean, they have some of the smartest minds around the table that are making these decisions.
Yeah, I was talking to someone recently who had interest in the NBA Europe project and investing in it, and they wondered how you would commercialize the whole thing. And basically, the sum of their thinking came down to, for better or worse, can you get the European fan to pay $50 for parking?
Exactly. That's a good, better way to, it's a better, more articulate way of saying it than I said it, but that's
No,
it.
no, but like that, it's the same thing. And it's like he didn't land anywhere because he really doesn't know, but he thinks that's kind of going to be part of the issue here is figuring out, can you get, in America, you can, right? You can get people to pay $50 for parking for a football game, for a basketball game. But can you commercialize the sport in Europe the way that you can in America? I
Well,
don't know.
I'll tell you. So the I think parking is a big thing. I think concessions are a big thing. The European culture is just not used to paying high prices for concessions, food and bev. The one thing the Europeans are used to paying a lot of money for is content and clothing. They pay a lot in merchandising. If you walk through the streets of Europe, this was a big thesis when I had brought professional soccer to the borough of Brooklyn. They will spend a lot of money on merchandise in Europe. How many times you walk the streets of London or Rome or Napoli or Madrid and you see New York, Big Apple. I love New York, Brooklyn. You see all of
Mhm.
that. So they will pay for merchandising. And the other thing is they will pay for content. The European sports fan is used to paying. We deal with this with our Italian soccer team all the time. The European sports fan is used to paying top dollar for pay-per-view content. With
Hmm.
Sky Sports, everything is behind paywalls and subscriptions. So I think that's something that is very interesting. Whereas the American audience is the opposite. I know, you work at the Athletic, and it took me literally, Mike, it took me years to finally fork over the $4.99 a month to subscribe to the Athletic, which is the premier sports business content but it's because as Americans, we're just not used to paying for content, and the
Yeah.
Europeans are. So I think the NBA just needs to sit around the room and they just need to understand the nuances that make the sports culture in Europe different than the US and exploit the areas that create opportunities and to be careful about the ones that create risks. And the last thing I'll say is that the other thing that makes Europe, I think, so challenging, but also so fascinating when it comes to NBA expansion or any sort of major US sports expansion is that it's so fragmented and it's so nuanced. When you talk about Europe, you're talking about a continent, but within the continent, look at the difference between doing business in Serbia and doing business in France and doing business in Italy and doing business in England. They're completely different uh, economies, they're completely different governments, they're completely different cultures. So you can't just take a one size fits all approach and say, yeah, we're going to expand into Europe. So the same rule that we have or the same principle we have that applies to our Madrid franchise is going to be the same principle that applies to our Serbian franchise or our Napoli franchise because it's just not going to work that way.
No, absolutely. But I am curious to see how it goes. And I'm obviously now going to be watching Napoli from afar to see how your team does. Good luck this afternoon against Bologna. That's going to be a tough one. I don't know why they had to go and give you the hardest team in the league just to start the
You
season.
got to play them all eventually, right, Mike? One home,
Yeah.
one away. Um,
Yeah.
we have a three-step process. Year one, get into the playoffs. Top 8 teams make the playoffs. It would be the first time in 2 decades where Napoli's made the playoffs in basketball. So that's our goal. Year one. Year two is compete for a championship, and year three is become a EuroLeague level team. So that's the goal, and eyes on the prize, one step at a time, Mike.
Yeah, well, good luck with step one. Business decision is now going to be watching Napoli every game. We'll watch as many games as we can. I appreciate you coming on to the show. Good luck with the entire Underdog
Thanks, Mike.
portfolio. And next time, I'm not going to ask you the hardest question, which
Awesome.
I thought about whether I should do it or not, and I thought it
Go
would be
for it.
unfair. You're going to
Let's
piss
do it.
off somebody.
Let's do it.
Are you
I'm used to it.
okay? All right. Who has better pizza, New York or Napoli?
I mean, you're talking to a native New Yorker, but
I know.
Italian roots. If I had a gun to my head, I'm gonna go with Italian pizza, but it's gotta be pizza in Naples. Naples is the birthplace of pizza.
Yeah.
And, so I would go with Neapolitan pizza, but New York has incredible pizza. My good friend and advisor Rosario Procino. I don't know if you've been to Ribalta, but he's a Neapolitan, born and bred restaurateur. Started Ribalta in New York. They just got ranked the 19th best pizza in the world. So you could
Okay.
actually get great Neapolitan pizza in New York, which is the one thing I don't mean to hedge on my answer, but the one thing about New York is you can find great New York style pizza and Neapolitan style pizza, Italian style pizza in New York City. In Italy, you can't. In Italy, you have only one type of pizza you can find. So I guess I'll change my vote and I'll say New York for that reason. Yeah.
And I'll take it one step further. New Jersey has better pizza than New York.
I'll tell you, Trenton is an incredible
Yeah,
pizza place, and it's very underrated. Is that what
it
you're
is. It is.
or-
It's got Jersey City, where I'm at. The New York Times called Raza the best pizza in New York. Come on out and try it.
Nice. I'm from my family's from Mount Vernon, New York, right outside the Bronx.
Okay,
We have Johnny's Pizza, which is right up there with any of them too. So maybe we could do a swap someday. Well, I'll go to your place, you come to mine.
let's figure it. We'll do a home and home.
Home and home, just like in basketball.
Exactly.
No, but
Matt.
thanks for the time. Also, just in terms of watching Napoli, I just wanted to let you know one thing I'm really proud of is we were able to negotiate a deal to stream all of our games in the United States and Canada. It's called Napoli TV. So all of our games are live streamed for free on our YouTube channel. We thought it was really important to just get our product exposed to the North American community. I believe we're one of the only, if not the only, European basketball team to have our own streaming service where our games are live streamed. So we're excited about it. 2 o'clock Eastern time today. Check us out. Hopefully we can shock the world, or at least shock Italy.
Oh, there you go. After you're done watching Business Decision on YouTube, go over to Napoli TV on YouTube. Subscribe there. Subscribe here. You've got a nice full day on this channel just to watch basketball all day, pretty much.
Thanks, Greg.
Um,
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for coming on to the show.
You too, Steve.
Everyone,
Up the
thank you
great
for
work.
listening to Business Decision. We'll catch you guys next time.